Hello once again everyone, and welcome back to the Zettel, where I'm joined once again by Eric, and we're going to be continuing with the Zwerch. So, what we're going to move into now is basically just more options depending upon how he parries the Zwerch. It's important to note that you're going to see variations between this as to like when you should go, when you should not go, how you should use this, and I'm going to try and flip-flop back and forth between him following the text with his responses and when I should get this, versus him doing a more common response and what you can do in response to it. So, first, what's going to happen is that my opponent is going to bind strongly and narrowly. So if he pushes things out and crumples me like we did before, this is not the time to utilize what we're going to move into next, which is the nuclearin. What we're really more looking for is I still about 70-ish% succeed on my Zwerch intention. He just really locks down this line, moving into sort of a scales position. So for this, I'll do the initial Zwerch. So I step up and I Zwerch at him. And he gets a strong bind, enough that I can't lever through, not enough that I want to take off either. So from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move into the nuclearin and doubling. I'm going to push my pommel underneath, maintaining that bind as it is until the cut goes behind his sword. Now, if I just do this with my hands, I can go where I need to go, but I won't hit him. The kind of footwork you do can vary. Footwork option number one, the one that I like, is I'm going to step with my lead foot, so I'm basically doing a crook foul. This allows me to kind of slot into place, but I stay relatively far away from it. Option number two is I'm going to do a cross-line pass as I do this. This gets my hips a little more lined up and can be good for covering distance, but after I finish it, I will have to immediately move again to the side. Either one is completely fine, and when we get into doing the nuclearin on the other side, we're going to see that same sort of variation. But really what you want to focus on here when it comes to executing the nuclearin, and I'll be first to admit, I didn't think nuclearins worked for the longest time until I really figured out this trick, which is when our swords cross, the goal is where they are touching should not move. I am not pushing myself deeper, which leads to his sword being free and it thunking onto your head, nor am I trying to push into his sword, which leads to an opening, though that is a different technique. What I'm really focusing on is where the sword stops, my right hand keeps that as it is, and my left hand just pivots around that point in space. I support that movement with my body rather than trying to reach with my arms, and that causes him to keep the pressure he has. When I do this, delivering the hit with my body instead of trying to reach with my arms, I have a pretty good success rate because he feels that pressure being maintained and just naturally follows the distance. But if I try to reach with my arms, that will very quickly go away from him and he won't feel the need to do so. So we'll do that same action again on this side, then we'll switch sides, and I'll talk about a variation you'll see commonly these days. So, step up, here, right there with the strike. Alternatively, there with the cross line, through with the slip out. Now, it should also be noted, you can cut it at two different angles. We'll go and switch them. Sometimes, depending upon distance, this ends up more like a chrome foul, which is also why I like stepping with the lead foot. It feels very familiar to me. But you can also turn it all the way off, so it turns essentially into a second Zwerch. It really doesn't necessarily matter. You strike him the same way either way. So, here's that again in the Furl Scales version. Right? So here I've got more toward what we're going to work into a minute. So let's do that again. There we go. Just like so. Now, another common variation that you'll see with this, especially if you can get someone listening to you, is rather than coming down into a narrow scales, they'll instead just move their arms over to block. This led very commonly into people getting the Zwerch copter going, because essentially all I got to do is I throw my first Zwerch, and I can just pop back and forth over and over and over again, and I just make his parries faster and faster and faster, and then eventually I'll get him. Or I can just put more juice into it, or I can feint. What's better than this, because a lot of people are used to doing this quickly or maintaining their distance, or even tagging your hands between those Zwerchs, is to instead do nuclearin. So, if I do manage to step up and get Eric to narrowly block, this is perfect time for a very quick nuclearin from good range. So I really recommend if you're going to make a follow-up, unless he actually gives you solid pressure on this side, preferably with movement that brings him closer to your left, then you cut the angle with the second Zwerch. Nuclearin's really your boy. So, now let's talk about our other option. Let's switch sides again. So this is, like I said on that one where we paused, Eric was closer to my hilt. You can still absolutely do the nuclearin from here, but there's a slightly sweeter option, I find. So, for this, we'll step up and recreate. We'll have Eric cutting me first, and I'll Zwerch into it. So, here. You see, it's just at that cross guard, right? I haven't quite succeeded, but he's strong enough that I can't move into him being weak. What I'm going to do from here is rather than cut the nuclearin, I'm going to shuck. Now the shuck is essentially I'm going to stab where my tip is pointed, which will push his sword off. Now from here, I leave my hands where they are and just push my pommel forward to cut behind his blade. The best way of thinking about this is you were here, push your arms out of line, and then cut going into a right ox. This has a ton of power. One, because of the range, you really don't need to step. Two, because of the power, I prefer not to step if I'm doing this, just because it is going to thunk him relatively hard if you do this quickly. But once again, the idea here is I step up, close to the hilt, push, push. And it really should be that motion of lead hand, backhand. If you try to do this with both, you're going to have excess power and the whole line is going to get wider. The more you can make this almost a bit like Newton's cradle, the better it's going to be. So let's switch sides and we'll do that again. And I will do, again without stepping, and then I'll do one with stepping just to show it. So, nice and straightforward, and now one with the step. And again, my hands are still acting exactly the same, I just get a little bit of angle as I do so. But these are both for when Eric is strong in the bind, something that I have to work with, and also something that's not quite far enough that I can cut around. Because as we saw before, you generally don't want to be cutting around if they're strong. Odds are they're probably ready for it and they're trying to force you into cutting around. So, next week we'll go over what happens if he is weak. So, thank you very, very much, Eric. And thank you all very much for watching. We'll go over some other techniques another time.